Welcome, Life Sciences, to another exciting life science lesson. What are we looking at today? Well, we're continuing on our journey looking at the human excretory system. And we're looking at this whole concept of excretion, right, where it's a new term, where we get rid of metabolic waste products in our body, right? Things have to be normal, things have to be in balance, and certain things in our body produce these waste products. So in order for our body to work properly, we actually need to get rid of these waste products. And that is why I said we start off looking, it's a very difficult concept that in order to work properly, we produce these waste products, but to work properly, we need to get rid of these waste products. So what are we going to look at today? If you have a look at the mind map behind me, we're going to quickly continue, well, very shortly, just do a little bit of a revision from our last session, just to go over the concept of what our excretory organs are. And then we're going to look at how the kidney functions. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is not an easy concept to understand, and it's not an easy concept to sometimes be able to describe because there's a lot of terms that are new. So it's not going to be like a walk in the park, but you need to be able to listen carefully, to go over it, and if you don't understand it, be able to go over it again and again and again. So as I said to you, we're going to look specifically, right, how the kidney is going to function. But let us do a little bit of revision first. Okay, so before we start with the revision, I always forget about the words. Remember, I'm going to speak biologically, and that means I'm going to use certain terms, and those terms you need to be able to understand. You also need to be able to understand the definition of them, right? It doesn't help us when we talk about things and we use words that we're not quite clear on. Okay, so the terminology, as I say to you all the time, these are the words you need to understand. Listen to me when I talk. How do I use those words? And if you're not sure, go over them a little bit later. Use your books, use your notes, just so that you understand the context in which the terms are used. All right, so let's just a quick revision from what we did, right, in the previous lessons. First of all, you must understand that excretion, right, have a look here. When we talk about excretion, what are we talking about? It's the removal of waste products. And then we use the term metabolic wastes. Remember, you guys have probably done digestive system and wastes were there, but they weren't, all right, metabolic wastes. The metabolic wastes that we spoke about was water. Now remember, water is sweating. So when we sweat, we get rid of water. That is a metabolic waste, right? From any kind of muscles moving, us doing exercise. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct when we breathe, cellular respiration. And we're going to breathe out carbon dioxide. That is also a metabolic waste. And then the new concept that we looked at was this nitrogenous waste. And nitrogenous wastes were wastes that usually had the element nitrogen, and we have to get rid of those because if we don't, they could be very detrimental to the body. And the three that we looked at were urea, uric acid, and creatinine. Those were the three nitrogenous wastes that we looked at. Then we looked at this whole concept of the human urinary system. Right, urinary, we could also use the word excretion. Okay, that means the same thing. And we looked at this concept of what organs, because that's what a system is, what organs make up this excretory system. Now, when we look at the major organs, we looked at this kidney. The kidney is the organs where filtering is going to occur. Then we're going to make the substance called urine. So the kidneys are going to make urine, and that's what we're going to look at today. And then the urine goes down these tubes Because we've got 2 kidneys, we have 2 tubes, and as you can see, it moves downwards against gravity, and they are called your ureters, right? All of these organs. The urine is then stored in an elastic bladder. Why do I mean elastic bladder? Because it fills with urine. And when it fills with urine, the brain senses this filling, and it senses when it gets really full. And over here, we have a little valve or a little sphincter, and we can control it, and it says, okay, relax, and the urine will then come out of the bladder and go to a tube called the urethra. The ureter and the urethra sound very similar, so don't get confused. We also need to look at blood vessels. Remember what gets filtered. Blood must be filtered. That's the whole concept. That's really important. We need to filter what's in the blood. So what's going to happen is we're going to have things move in, and we're going to have things move out, right? Blood comes in, and then we're going to have things moved out. Then, very importantly, we looked at the macroscopic. We cut the kidney in half, and we have a look at the structure of the kidney. You need to know this diagram. You need to be able to label this diagram. And when we cut the kidney open, we can see that's got some really distinctive features. And one of the distinctive features was this concept over here called, the renal pyramids. Now, these renal pyramids, if we look at them, okay, they look like I think they always look like fish, right? They look like fish fins. They've got these very particular lines in them. And that is going to lead us to today's lesson. Because what is going to happen is when we get to the kidney, and you need to understand this concept before I show you the next picture. Unlike the different organs you've done in the past, like the heart, where the whole heart works, here, the kidney, the whole structure of the kidney doesn't do a work. There are millions of little structures. They are the workers inside the kidney. And let's have a look what they are. These little workers are called nephrons. Very important, right? A nephron. Know that name. And this is basically what we call the microscopic structure. Because they're so tiny, we cannot see them. But have a look at this diagram over here. So what I've done is, the diagram shows this whole concept of what a nephron is. And here it is slightly larger. And now we can see it's got all these long tubes going downwards. And if we put millions of these little tubes together, can you see where we get that characteristic structure, right, that we call the pyramid, the medulla, inside of our kidney? Now, when we look at the inside of the kidney, when we look at the nephron, right, the nephron looks like this. And I see, as soon as you see the picture, right, it's like, oh my word, this is a really complicated structure. Yes, it is. You need to be able to label the structure, and you need to be able to know how it works, how it functions. Right, so we're going to have a look at it in much closer detail. Now, when we look at the nephron, I'm going to draw a very simple one here at the top. It's made up of a C-shaped, right, capsule at the top, and then it's made of these tubules that go up and down, but it's really, really convoluted. Now, when we have a look at these tubules, what we see is the following. The first thing is called the renal corpuscle. And what the renal corpuscle is the C-shaped, right, part of the nephron. And inside it, we're going to have this very convoluted blood structure. And that is going to be called the glomerulus. And this is very important, guys, because what happens is all the filter, what we want to get out, we've got to get out of the blood into the nephron. Then if we look at the rest of the tubules, what are we going to see? I'm going to go back to the blue. It's tubules. So the first part is where the blood meets the nephron, and then we have all these different tubules that are going to do the work. And they are the following. The first one is right at the top, is called the proximal convoluted tubule. And that's exactly what it is. It's close to the front. Convoluted means twisted, and it's a tube. The second one is the loop of Henle. And the loop of Henle, right, is a long tube where lots of things are going to occur, and we'll look at that a little bit later. After the proximal convoluted tubule is the distal convoluted tubule. And the distal means behind and twisted. Then the very last tubule we look at is called the collecting ducts. Okay, guys, a whole lot of new terminology. When we take a break now, I want you to just go over the structure of the nephron, just familiarize yourself with it, and then we'll be right back. Welcome back from your wee break. I hope you had a little bit of a break, maybe stretch the arms a bit, stretch the brain muscles, just got all the blood flowing. So guys, remember what we're looking at now. We're looking at how the kidney functions. And this is, as I said to you, quite a difficult, thing to try and explain, to look at, but we're just going to go through it step by step. Now, in the previous segment, we looked at this concept of what a nephron is, and we're going to look at it in greater detail as we go along. Now, the nephron is the working unit. The nephron does the work in the kidney, not the whole organ. So imagine you've got millions of these filtering, and imagine at the end, each little one drops a little drop of urine into the kidney to be able to excrete. Now, what we're going to look at is going to see how this whole functioning occurs. And we're going to have a three-step process. In this segment, we're going to look at a process called glomerular filtration. There are three processes in this whole process: glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular excretion. The name very often gives a hint of exactly what is happening. Okay, so let's take a look at this first process. When we look at the process, you also need to think. I always tell my kids, structure versus function. How is it made? What does it look like so that it enables things to work very, very smoothly? And this is a concept that is very important for the next section. Okay, guys, so what happens, I want you to have a look at the diagram over here. This is what we call the renal corpuscle. And sometimes I've seen, it's also called, the Malpighian corpuscle. Right, I prefer the renal corpuscle, but this is called the Malpighian. And what it does, what are we looking through here, is this word filtration. To filtrate means, or filtration means to filter. And what are we filtering? Here, lovely bold red, we have two blood vessels. Now, these blood vessels are arterioles, which means they are small arteries. And they become smaller and smaller, and they are these convoluted group of blood vessels that are called our capillaries. Now, if you can remember when we looked at capillaries, we know they are very thin structures. They're only made up of one layer of cells. I hope you maybe can remember the endothelium, a layer of squamous epithelium. They are very thin. Why do we want something thin? Because we've got to move things. Look at my arrows. I want to filter my blood. So I need to get everything that's in the blood into the nephron, because what is the nephron going to do? It's going to filter, okay? It's going to filter it. So I need to be able to filter it quite efficiently. Now, if you have a look at this diagram, I don't know if you can see that this blood vessel, the afferent, is thicker than this blood vessel. And that is really good because it creates pressure. So why is pressure good? It creates squeezing. Now have a look. If more blood goes in than comes out, you've got like squeezing happening over here. All this blood is trapped and it's forced out into the kidney. All right. So when we look at this whole concept of glomerular filtration, glomerular blood filtrationing filter, filtering stuff in the blood, forcing it out of the blood into, all right, this Bowman's capsule, this nephron. Remember, what does the work? The nephron does. So when we have this high pressure, it's good. It forces it. It squeezes it, all right? And it forces all this blood to move as quickly as possible into this Bowman's capsule. Now, if you have a look at the Bowman's capsule, I want you to have a look at this, all right, really weird diagram over here. The Bowman's capsule, all right, on the inside has got these specialized cells, and they are called podo. Oh, let me erase that quickly. All right, not bodo. All right, let's go podo. Now, what a podocyte is, have a look. It's wrapped around the blood vessel, and it has all these squigglies. And what it does is it forces, when the blood comes through, it's forced into these cells. They are large surface area, and they've got these little slits. It's almost like a comb. And what can filter through those? Things in the blood. But now I want you to keep in mind what things in the blood. That is going to be really essential. What parts of the blood am I going to get through? Do you see how it's wrapped up oh so nicely here? That here's the blood vessel, right? So everything can go through these filtration slits. Now, if I look at this, what do I filter? This is really important. What must be here? Now, if I have a very thin layer here, and I have a very thin layer over here, size matters. What do I mean by size matters? Things that are too big. If you are too big, you cannot go through. Right? So if you are too large, you are not allowed to go through into the nephron. What would be too big? Number one, all the blood cells. Right? We don't want the red blood cell, the white blood cell, and the platelets. We don't want them to get through. They are too big. So what are they going to do? They're going to go straight through, and they're not going to be infected at all. Another thing we don't want are big protein bodies, right? We don't want those. They are too big. We don't want them. And what are they going to do? Oops, they're going to find their way back again. So they're not going to come into the nephron. So guys, if you find blood or if you find protein in your urine, that might be an indication that something is wrong, right? Why would there be blood? Why would there be proteins? Because they don't filter through. Maybe something could be seriously wrong. But what is in the blood? Okay, so first thing that it is, there's going to be the waste products. And those are important. My urea, my uric acid, and my creatinine. They dissolved, they're my nitrogenous wastes, and they are in the blood. They definitely have to go through. Then there are things dissolved in the blood. Glucose, amino acids. What else? Salt. Some vitamins maybe. All right, and maybe I've got things, maybe I've got colorants. I ate beetroot, and now all of a sudden my urine is red. Or I had a headache, and I took a headache tablet, so I might have drugs in my system. Right, so I've got a whole list of things that are dissolved in the blood plasma. Okay, blood plasma. They are small enough. They are going to be, let me change the color quickly. They are going to be small enough to move by this ultrafiltration, ultra squeezing. By this ultrafiltration, they are then going to move from the glomerulus. Remember, what was my glomerulus? My blood, because it's glomerular filtration. They're going to move out of the blood, and they are going to move into the nephron. All of this stuff that's moved to it, moves into this and is now called the filtrate. This is now going to move through the rest of the nephron. Now, we don't usually do questions all the time, but I'm going to have maybe a little bit of time just to make you aware that this process of glomerular filtration is a question that is asked constantly. Right? When we look at the kidney, the structure of the nephron, when this whole structure, because as you can see, it tells you it's the renal corpuscle. It says study the diagram. All right, guys, now the next question is quite a common question. And it's got two parts to it. It says name and explain the process that occurs in the renal corpuscle. Now, the process you're going to say is glomerular filtration. Now, that is just the first part. This is the difficult part. What do you have to explain? You must explain the difference in size between the afferent and efferent. And that leads to pressure, ultrafiltration. You also need to describe what moves out of the glomerulus, what moves out. You need to tell me what happens, what is in the blood, what moves into the Bowman's capsule. You also need to explain the concepts of the podocyte. Why do the podocytes with their filtration slits increase the surface area? So when it comes to this question, as I said, it's often asked. You need to explain, write down in point form, make sure you know it, right, how glomerular filtration occurs. Welcome back, Life Sciences. I hope you had a good little wee break. You know, when we say wee, when we're looking at excretion, what are we looking at? We are looking at how the kidney actually functions. And as I said to you, there's quite a challenging part. It's not an easy concept to understand. And when we're looking at how it functions, it's not the kidney that does the work. It's going to be the little parts called nephrons inside the kidney. Right, we are looking at three basic concepts when it comes to the nephron. If you can remember the last segment that we looked at the process called glomerular, filtration. And what that was is we looked at this part of the diagram over here. And that was the first part where we looked at how we filtered, right, how we filtered the blood from the glomerulus into the nephron, the Bowman's capsule, glomerular filtration. Remember, that is what it's all about. The nephron does the work. It filters. And when I filter something, right, this part is quite important. I keep what I want, and I get rid of what I don't want. That's really important, what I don't want. Now, we're talking over here about the kidney. So what are we talking about when we talk about filters? What do we need? What do I still want? Things that help my body to function properly. And what do I want to get rid of? Things that are going to hinder, all right, or stop me from working properly. Anything that's going to have a negative consequence. So the last segment that we looked at, glomerular filtration, the blood, all the things in the blood plasma, we filtered, ultrafiltration from the glomerulus into the nephron. So now if I had to change color quickly, all of this, all right, now where's it going? It's going to go along the journey of the tubes. So we've gone out of the glomerulus, and now we're going to be, it's like a super slide, all right? We're going to go on the tube journey. We're going to go through the tubes. Now, we have looked at glomerular filtration. We have looked at this. This segment, we are going to look at tubular absorption or tubular reabsorption. And the word tells us exactly what it's going to do. So guys, if I'm in the tubes, right, if I've got filter in the tubes, what do I now want? There are things in here that I need to reabsorb. I need to take out of the tubes, and where do I need to put it? I need to put it back into the blood. Remember, I'm filtering. Filtering means I keep in the kidney the bad stuff, and I want to, the stuff that I still need, I want to keep. I've got to keep it. I don't want to get rid of it. Okay, this is a diagram that you need to become quite familiar with. So if I look here, if we looked at this process, what would number one be? That would be glomerular filtration. All right, now if we had a list, I'm going to list them all again. What was in this glomerulus? There was urea, there was uric acid, there was creatinine, and those are all my nitrogenous wastes, bad stuff, right? So I'm going to put a red mark by them. I definitely need to get rid of those. Those must go, you know, like frozen, let it go. We have to let it go. But what else was in my blood? Other things, glucose, sodium, which is salt, some amino acids, water was one of them, maybe some vitamins, water-soluble vitamins. Now this list over here, if I have to put a list over here, these are the good things. What do I mean? Let me go quickly, erase there. What do I mean by good things? These are the things that my body still needs. Glucose helps me with energy. Salt helps the balances in my body. But we've got to watch out how much we have. Amino acids build proteins. Very important. Water balance, important in my body. I can't let all the water go. Some vitamins I still need. Maybe the fat-soluble ones I can keep back. Maybe the water-soluble ones I might want to get rid of. My body will decide what I need. So when I get to this point number 2, and this is where we're looking at over here. Point number 2, if you have a look at the blood, there's blood all around the nephron. So I've got this concept of the nephron, and if I had to put in the blood is all around. And what does that mean? That means that filtering never, ever stops. So at point number 2, tubular reabsorption. Do you see all my good things? All the ones with the ticks, the glucose, the salt, here we go, the sodium, some minerals, all the things that my body, some vitamins, all the things that my body still needs. Have a look here. Tubular reabsorption. They go from the tubules back into the blood. Why in the blood? Because my blood wants to keep them. Now, when we have a look at this process of tubular reabsorption, all right, when we have a look at it, we're going to see that this process is very reliant on something that we call active transport. Now, I want to show you, if I was to take a little picture of what this tube looks like, I want to draw it for you. Okay, if I have to draw that little picture that I've indicated over here, I'm going to redraw it over here. So this little part of the tubule, and this tubule that we are looking at is called the proximal convoluted tubule. Right, and as I said to you before, proximal, close to the top, convoluted means twisted. Now, in this tubule, if I had to draw a cell, the cell looks like this. Right, those are microvilli, and microvilli, if I draw that, they increase the surface area. But what do they also have a lot of is mitochondria. Right, lots of mitochondria. Now, I know maybe when we looked at transport in cells, we looked at this whole concept of active transport. And active transport is when we go against the concentration gradient. Remember, I always say it's easier to kick somebody down a hill than it is to try and push them up. Now, if I have to push them up, I've got to do a lot of work. I've got to use a lot of energy. And this exactly is what happens in tubular reabsorption. What's happening here during active transport is when all of these good substances, right? Remember I said there was glucose, there was sodium, right? There were some vitamins, there were some minerals, all of those. I'm going to put it over here. How they go from the tubule into the blood is by active transport. They go against, right, the concentration gradient. We're going uphill because there's more of these substances in the blood than there is in the kidney. So they're not going to go by a process, right, of passive transport, diffusion, etc. So very much against the concentration gradient, as I said to you, a process, let me put it here, called active transport. Now, what's also going to go out at this time, out of the tubules, right, is going to be water. Now, water moves out of the tubules and it also goes into the blood. And that is by a process called osmosis. Because what is going to happen is within the kidney itself, we're going to have a lot of salts, and we're going to look at that just now. The next segment, we're going to have a lot of salts, and water is going to move. So all these things, I've got a tick next to them. All of them are going to be, right, things that I want my body to keep. So I'm definitely not going to want to get rid of them. So I'm going to keep that in a process called, all right, the tubular reabsorption. Sure, guys, after all that confusing stuff, all of that reabsorption, active transport, our brains definitely need a break. We're going to have a quick little wee break, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome, Life Sciences. Welcome back from your wee break. I think you needed that after all that terminology after terminology after terminology. As I said to you, this is quite a challenging section that we are looking at. What are we looking at? We're looking at the human excretory system. And this time we are looking specifically, how does the kidney work? And it's a very intricate, it's a quite a complicated way in how the kidney, or little structures that we looked at inside the kidney, the nephron, how they are going to filter, all right, all of the blood. So look what we're looking at. The blood must come into the kidney, right? It comes into the kidney, and the kidney's function is to filter. And as I said to you, what I mean by filter, I need to keep the waste products, and I need to get rid of what is good. I know that sounds weird, but what goes through our kidney to filter means I need to keep the things that my body still needs, and I need to get rid of the waste that could be harmful to me. And that is the function of the kidney. But the kidney is made up of a little structure called the nephron, right? And parts of the nephron, each got a little part in how it's going to, right, filter. So at the end result, we've got this waste product that we're going to call urine. Okay, that is where we're at. All right, oopsie daisy, going the wrong way. Right, guys, still a lot of terminology here, a lot of words, right, that we haven't encountered before. Just make sure that you understand how to use them, when to use them, and what they mean. So where have we been so long? So we have looked at, the first part that we looked at was glomerular filtration, and we had a look at this concept of the nephron is made up of the C-shaped capsule called a Bowman's capsule, and all the blood, right, let me change it to red, it's much easier, all the blood, the glomerulus that comes in here, and then we filter everything that is necessary that can fit through, goes out of the glomerulus, the blood, and it goes into the Bowman's capsule. Then afterwards, we looked at the process of tubular reabsorption, and we have a look, there are tubes, right, round about all of the nephron, and usually in this first tube, the proximal convoluted tubule, a lot of the things that we still need, glucose, as I said to you, water, maybe some sodium, right, or minerals, we bring back reabsorption. We bring back into the blood. Our last process that we're going to look at now is called tubular excretion. Now, if we have a look at the definition of what it is, it's, if I were to say, it's the opposite of tubular reabsorption. So basically, let's look at our nephron again. We draw. We've got all these tubules, right? And they're carrying all of this filtrate. That's the word that we use. Surrounding this nephron, I'm going to draw it in red, we've got this blood supply that it actually looks like a tangled mess. But that is really important because why? When we looked at the processes over here, tubular reabsorption, if we go back again, we reabsorbed substances. What does that mean? We took the things that we needed. Now, tubular excretion means that in the blood, there is still waste products. Guys, this whole blood system that's surrounding the nephron, that's twisted, what do we still have in it? We're going to have waste products. So where must these waste products go? they must now go into the tubules. Look at my arrow over here. Tubular reabsorption, my arrow went out of the tubules. Tubular excretion is going to go back into the tubules. So when we look at this process, right, as I said to you, it's the opposite. If I go to this diagram over here, the one that we did earlier. So what is number one? Number one, right, was my glomerular filtration. What did I do? I filtered the blood. I filtered the glomerulus. Number two, what did I have? Tubular reabsorption. I'm not going to write that. I'm just going to write out as far as that. And look at the arrow. What did tubular reabsorption entail? It entailed everything that I still needed. Okay. Needed. It was reabsorbed back into the blood because I still needed it. But have a look at the blood. The blood is filled with waste products. And those waste products could still be maybe some urea, could be some uric acid or creatinine. And sometimes when we look at the concept later, you will see maybe some hydrogen. It's a way that our body is going to control the pH, and maybe even some chloride. Right, but what we find over there is, what do? We don't have it it's in the blood, and look at the arrow. Tubular excretion. And let's go back to that definition of excretion. What did excretion mean? Getting rid of waste products. And tubular means getting rid of into the tubules. So all of these things, all right, my body now no longer needs it. It's in the blood supply, and I then, all right, put it back into the tubules. So it goes back into the tubules. It usually can happen in the proximal convoluted tubule, but it usually happens a lot more in the distal convoluted tubule. That's where it's going to happen a bit more often than in the rest. Now if we have a look at this diagram, we can look at the whole process, right, in the bigger sphere of things. So number one, if you can understand, glomerular filtration, right? So that is it coming from the blood into the glomerulus. Here, number three, tubular reabsorption. I take what I need, or tubular secretion, I prefer the term excretion, right? Whatever I don't need goes back into the tubes. Now, guys, this leads us to this very last important concept. So, if everything came into the blood, right, and then entered the kidney, the nephron has this whole concept that it must filter. So by the time that it gets to, now let's have a look on my journey, by the time it gets to these last tubes, they are called the collecting ducts. Let me have a look at the next diagram, and I don't have to draw over here. Okay, so we've gone through our three processes. Here, the very last tube is my collecting duct. And what this collecting duct over here, when it gets to this point, okay, guys, what is carried in here is urine. And what must urine be? Urine must be all the substances that my body doesn't need. What was that? It was urea. It was uric acid. Right, it was creatinine. So it was all my creatinine, it was all my nitrogenous wastes. Right, what else could be here? If I had, right, drugs, if I had a headache tablet, or if I'm naughty and I do drugs, maybe some kind of colorants, right, maybe a hormone. So all the things that I didn't want, they are then present in this thing called urine. Now I've left out the most important thing, whoopsie daisy, that we get when we get to urine. What else is in there? Water. We don't wee powder. When we urinate, it is water. And how do we get rid of this waste? We make sure that there is some water in these tubules that is going to be excreted. So imagine if I've got all of them and they each drip. I've got these millions, right? Millions and millions of nephrons. And they each drip something into the pelvis. And that pelvis, right, leads into the ureter. Where does the ureter go? The ureter is going to take all this and it's going to store it in the bladder. And when it's stored in the bladder, as I said, the bladder is going to stretch and our brain's going to tell us, lady, right, it's full. Let us go to the toilet. And then we have a urethra and then we go to the toilet. Okay, guys, so that is what we've looked at, this whole concept. It's a kind of like a bit of a mass thing. What went in, all right, was a whole lot of stuff. And then I filtered everything. Some of the stuff I needed, so I reabsorbed it, I took it out. Some of the waste that I hadn't collected, I put back in. And at the end, I had this substance called urine. That was the waste product. And the excretory system, the human urinary system, excretes and gets rid of this substance called urine. That is all we have time for. I hope you understood this. It is a difficult section. Until next time, cheerio, bye.